At several times in life, one comes to a point of no return. The drama of this moment often escapes us. We walk into it unconcerned, not hearing all the closing doors slam behind us, not aware that suddenly we're cut adrift from the past and are loose on the high seas, charting a new course through undiscovered waters. I must have been 4 when it first happened to me. I was living with my mother and father, my brother and our nanny in an old pink farmhouse with a moat surrounded by the cornfields of Essex. That morning, they were burning the stubble. We knew because my mother came charging into the house after dropping my father off at the station. "Nanny, Mrs. Smithers, they're burning the stubble." Mayhem. I sat on the hall floor as the 3 women in my life careered around the house, slamming doors, closing windows, and drawing curtains. Footsteps pounded across the creaky floorboards above, shaking the whole house. My mother's purposeful gait, identifiable to her children a mile off, and Mrs. Smithers, like a gentle elephant, squeezed into my mother's hand-me-down court shoes. Snatches of conversation could be heard from the gables, a peal of laughter from my mother, and then silence. The sun, battling through the curtains, made the house feel like an aquarium during the burning of the stubble, and since my mother was a stickler for cleanliness, they could stay closed for days until the last fleck of black ash floated off through the sky. I loved it. Darkness made you feel naughty, while outside the inferno raged around us. Alas, in the countryside today, stubble is no longer burned after harvest. I suppose that nowadays children, whole families maybe, would just drive into the fiery fields like lemmings, and the news would be full of amateur video footage of little kids writhing in flames and sobbing parents with their lawyers threatening revenge. But in our day, it was the highlight of the summer, and we children were out there, watched over by the local farmers from beginning to end, looking for hedgehogs, field mice to save from the fire, and only leaving as the dusk fell on the black glowing embers and the fields around our house had turned into giant tiger-skin rugs. Meanwhile, inside the house that morning, we settled down to the agreeable state of siege, and all sat in the kitchen as Mummy and Mrs. Smithers reminisced about former stubbles, and Nanny made coffee and ribena. "That dratted ash can get through anything," my mother could say 1,000 times during the course of the next 2 weeks, and Mrs. Smithers would keep on nodding sagely like a toy bulldog on the back seat of a car. So it came as quite a surprise that it was decided that I should be taken to the cinema. "What's the cinema?" I whined, lips a-quiver, ready for a tantrum. But there was no arguing and no explanation. "You'll see," was the only answer. So pretty soon we all bundled into our Hillman, Mummy at the wheel, me beside her with my own steering wheel suction stuck to the dashboard, and Nanny in the back. And we drove at a snail's pace through the howling flames down the chase that led to our house, so that I could at least have a good look. I suppose nobody had thought it necessary to tell Mummy that flames made petrol explode, or maybe they shared her empire ruler's mentality and naturally assumed that nothing as common as an explosion could happen in her Hillman. Until that year, 1965, we did not possess a television. The only images I saw were happening then and there in front of my very eyes. I had no concept of a world outside and no desire to find one. When Churchill died, my father went out and bought a large, cumbersome set so that he and my mother could watch the funeral, and that was the first moving picture I ever saw. Grainy, incomprehensible, and utterly boring, I thought. But then I turned around to see the tear-stained, enraptured faces of my parents and must have reconsidered. This television could get a lot of attention. The Braintree Cinema would be getting a lot of attention too. It was an unremarkable building, one of those dismal British constructions from the 50s, with a curved brick front, crittle windows, and a shabby marquee. We parked the car and joined the long line that stretched around the cinema. None of us much liked queuing. My mum always had a million things to do, and I wanted to get back home to the stubble, and we nearly decided to leave, but fate was hell-bent, and after half an hour of ranting, Mummy, and whining, me, we arrived at the box office. And so my mother bought the fateful tickets and unknowingly guided me through a pair of swing doors into the rest of my life. Goodbye, Braintree.